Mahatma Gandhi, often referred to as the father of the nation in India, remains a towering figure in the history of the modern world. His philosophy of nonviolence and truth, known as ahimsa and satyagraha, transcended borders and inspired movements for civil rights and freedom across the globe. Born as Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi on October 2, 1869, in a small coastal town of Porbandar in British India, Gandhi's life became a testament to the power of simplicity, conviction, and moral strength in the face of oppression. Gandhi's significance lies not merely in his leadership of India's independence movement, but in his ability to mobilize millions with a message rooted in peace and justice. His unique approach to resistance, eschewing violence and hatred, was revolutionary at a time when much of the world was steeped in conflict and colonial dominance. Gandhi proved that profound change could be achieved without resorting to arms, a lesson that reverberates through history even today. At the core of Gandhi's ideology was the belief in the innate dignity of every human being. He rejected the hierarchical structures imposed by colonial powers and the caste system, striving instead for a society based on equality and mutual respect. This principle formed the backbone of his political and personal endeavors. His leadership was not just a struggle for political independence, but also a battle against social evils like untouchability, poverty, and religious discord. Gandhi's methods were rooted in the ancient Indian traditions of self-restraint and spiritual discipline. He championed the idea that personal transformation could lead to societal change, a philosophy he lived by. By adopting a minimalist lifestyle, wearing homespun cloth, and practicing self-sufficiency, Gandhi embodied the ideals he advocated. His life became an open book, inspiring others to follow his path not only through his words, but also through his actions. The legacy of Gandhi's nonviolent resistance extends far beyond India's borders. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, and the Dalai Lama drew heavily from his teachings. Gandhi demonstrated that even in the face of immense power disparities, moral authority could triumph over brute force. His campaigns against oppressive British laws, like the Salt March in 1930, became iconic symbols of peaceful defiance, captivating the world's imagination. However, Gandhi was not without his critics. Some questioned the practicality of his methods and the compromises he made during India's struggle for freedom. Others criticized his insistence on nonviolence, particularly during communal riots that erupted during the partition of India. Despite these criticisms, Gandhi's steadfast adherence to his principles underscored his belief that the means are as important as the ends. For him, achieving freedom through violence would only perpetuate cycles of oppression and hatred. What makes Gandhi's story even more remarkable is how he embraced his imperfections. He often referred to his life as a series of experiments with truth. This humility made him relatable, allowing ordinary people to see themselves in his journey. Gandhi's willingness to admit his mistakes and learn from them reinforced his authenticity, earning him the respect of friends and adversaries alike. In an era marked by rapid industrialization and materialism, Gandhi's message of simplicity and sustainability resonates deeply. He advocated for a world where human needs, not greed, guided economic and social systems. His emphasis on self-reliance and small-scale industry was a visionary response to the dehumanizing forces of capitalism and colonialism, ideas that are increasingly relevant in today's discussions on climate change and economic inequality. Gandhi's influence was not confined to politics or economics. It extended to personal ethics and spirituality. His teachings challenged individuals to introspect and align their lives with universal values of love, compassion, and justice. For Gandhi, true freedom meant liberation from fear, hatred, and ignorance, a vision that continues to inspire humanity. In summary, Mahatma Gandhi was more than a political leader. He was a moral force that reshaped the world's understanding of power and resistance. Through his life and work, he taught us that lasting change begins within and that the path to justice is as important as the destination. As we delve deeper into his life story, we uncover not only the journey of an extraordinary individual, but also the timeless principles that continue to guide us in our quest for a better world. Mahatma Gandhi's journey to becoming an icon of peace and resistance began in a modest setting. Born on October 2, 1869, in the coastal town of Porbandar, Gujarat, Gandhi was the youngest son of Karamchand Gandhi, a local political leader, and Putlabai, a deeply religious woman. His early life was marked by the cultural and moral values instilled in him by his parents, shaping the foundation of his later philosophies. Though his childhood appeared ordinary, the seeds of his extraordinary life were planted during these formative years. The Gandhi household was steeped in religious and cultural diversity. Karamchand Gandhi, despite his administrative role, lived modestly and encouraged integrity in all aspects of life. Putlabai, on the other hand, devoted her days to prayer, fasting, and acts of service, instilling in young Mohandas a sense of duty and compassion. The convergence of these influences fostered a deep respect for spirituality and truth, values that would become central to Gandhi's ideology. As a child, Gandhi was shy and unremarkable, often described as introverted and reserved. He found comfort in books and religious stories, drawing inspiration from Indian epics like the Ramayana and Mahabharata. These tales, alongside his mother's devout practices, introduced him to concepts of righteousness, nonviolence, and moral dilemmas. However, it was not until later in life that he fully understood the profound relevance of these lessons. Gandhi's schooling was unremarkable, and he was neither an exceptional student nor an athlete. However, he demonstrated an early inclination toward truthfulness. A pivotal moment occurred when a school inspector visited his classroom and gave a spelling test. Gandhi made a spelling error, and his teacher urged him to copy the correct answer from a classmate. Yet, Gandhi refused, valuing honesty over fear of punishment. This small act of defiance marked the beginning of his unwavering commitment to truth, a principle that would guide his life. Another significant event during his childhood was his encounter with the concept of nonviolence. Gandhi once recalled an incident where he observed his father deal with a difficult situation calmly and without anger. This left a lasting impression, teaching him that patience and reason could resolve conflicts better than force. Such early experiences laid the groundwork for his later belief in nonviolent resistance. Gandhi's adolescence, however, was not without its struggles. He experimented with defiance, indulging in petty theft, and even tasting meat despite his family's vegetarian beliefs. These acts were driven by curiosity and peer influence rather than malice, but they left him burdened with guilt. Unable to bear the weight of his conscience, he confessed his misdeeds to his father in a heartfelt note. His father's response, tears instead of anger, deeply moved Gandhi and reinforced his commitment to truth and repentance. The concept of self-discipline also took root during these years. Gandhi observed his mother's rigorous fasting rituals and unwavering dedication to her spiritual practices. While initially challenging for him to grasp, these lessons of self-restraint and inner strength began to resonate. Over time, Gandhi would incorporate these practices into his philosophy of personal and societal transformation. Religion played an influential role in shaping Gandhi's worldview during his childhood. Though born into a Hindu family, he was exposed to diverse religious traditions, including Jainism, Islam, and Christianity. The Jains, in particular, influenced his understanding of nonviolence and asceticism. This exposure cultivated a respect for pluralism, enabling Gandhi to develop a broader perspective on faith and humanity. Despite his modest upbringing, Gandhi's parents ensured he received a proper education. They hoped he would follow in his father's footsteps as a public servant. However, young Gandhi's lack of direction often worried his family. This concern eventually led to the decision to send him abroad for higher studies, setting the stage for a transformative chapter in his life. Gandhi's childhood, though seemingly ordinary, was instrumental in shaping the man he would become. It was during these years that he began to internalize the values of truth, humility, and service. The lessons learned from his family, community, and personal experiences laid the foundation for his life's work. As he prepared to leave the comforts of his home to explore the larger world, Gandhi carried with him the moral compass that would guide him through the trials and triumphs of his remarkable journey. Mahatma Gandhi's journey to England marked the beginning of a profound transformation in his life. At the age of 18, Gandhi left his small town of Porbandar in 1888 to pursue a legal education at the Inner Temple in London. The decision to study abroad was driven by family aspirations for him to secure a prestigious career, but the experience proved to be far more than an academic pursuit. It became a critical period of self-discovery, cultural exposure, and the early formation of Gandhi's philosophical outlook. Before leaving, Gandhi faced opposition from his community. Traveling overseas was frowned upon by traditionalists in his caste, as it was seen as a threat to cultural and religious purity. Gandhi defied these norms with the support of his family, particularly his brother. This decision to prioritize personal growth over societal expectations was an early indication of his ability to challenge conventions when necessary. Upon his arrival in England, Gandhi encountered a world vastly different from the one he had known in India. London, bustling with industrial progress and modernity, presented a stark contrast to the simplicity of his hometown. Initially, Gandhi struggled to adapt. He found himself grappling with homesickness, cultural alienation, and the challenge of integrating into British society while preserving his identity. Yet, these struggles proved to be fertile ground for his growth. One of Gandhi's first dilemmas was dietary. Raised in a strict vegetarian household, he faced pressure to adopt the meat-heavy British diet to assimilate. However, after reading a vegetarian pamphlet, he resolved to maintain his dietary principles. This decision led him to join the London Vegetarian Society, where he met like-minded individuals and was introduced to ideas about health, ethics, and animal rights. His interactions with this group were instrumental in shaping his belief in the interconnectedness of life and the importance of self-discipline. Gandhi's time in England also marked the beginning of his exploration of diverse philosophical and religious ideas. He delved into texts like the Bhagavad Gita, the Bible, and the works of Tolstoy and Ruskin. These readings exposed him to universal truths about morality, service, and the pursuit of justice. He was particularly inspired by Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, which resonated with his growing commitment to nonviolence and love for humanity. In addition to intellectual growth, Gandhi sought to refine his demeanor and appearance to fit into British society. He took lessons in elocution, European manners, and even ballroom dancing. However, this phase of superficial adaptation was short-lived. Gandhi soon realized that true respect came not from mimicking others, but from being authentic and principled. This realization strengthened his resolve to remain true to his values while engaging with the broader world. London also served as a training ground for Gandhi's legal career. He diligently attended his law lectures, studied case law, and prepared to pass the bar exam. While he was not a natural orator, he compensated with meticulous preparation and a strong work ethic. This phase taught him the importance of perseverance, clarity, and the power of logical argument, skills that would prove invaluable in his later activism. A significant aspect of Gandhi's awakening during this time was his growing sense of social justice. Through his interactions with fellow students and intellectuals, he became aware of the inequalities and imperial dynamics that shaped the British Empire. While Gandhi had not yet fully embraced his role as a political leader, the seeds of his concern for the marginalized and oppressed were sown in these formative discussions. Despite the personal growth he experienced, Gandhi faced moments of doubt and introspection. He often questioned whether he was living up to his family's expectations and the sacrifices they had made for him to study abroad. These reflections deepened his sense of responsibility and commitment to making his life meaningful, not just for himself, but for others. By the time Gandhi completed his studies and was called to the bar in 1891, he had undergone a significant transformation. He returned to India not only as a qualified barrister, but as a man with a broader perspective on the world and a deeper understanding of his principles. While his time in England did not yet reveal the full extent of his future path, it laid the foundation for his evolution as a thinker, leader, and global icon. The lessons of adaptability, self-discipline, and moral courage he learned in England would guide him in the trials that lay ahead. Mahatma Gandhi's years in South Africa were pivotal in shaping his identity as a leader and a revolutionary thinker. When Gandhi accepted a one-year contract in 1893 to work as a legal advisor for a merchant in Natal, South Africa, he could not have foreseen how profoundly the experience would transform him. What began as a professional opportunity turned into a defining chapter in his life, marked by his awakening to social injustice and the development of his philosophy of nonviolent resistance, or satyagraha. Upon his arrival in South Africa, Gandhi encountered the harsh realities of institutionalized racism and discrimination. As an Indian immigrant in a predominantly white-controlled society, he was subjected to systemic racial prejudice. The most iconic incident of this period occurred during a train journey to Pretoria, where Gandhi, despite holding a first-class ticket, was forcibly ejected from the carriage reserved for white passengers. This humiliation was a turning point in his life, awakening him to the pervasive injustice faced by people of color in the British Empire. Rather than succumbing to despair, Gandhi chose to confront these injustices. He began by organizing the Indian community in South Africa, which was primarily composed of indentured laborers and merchants. Many of these individuals faced brutal working conditions, denial of basic rights, and severe social marginalization. Gandhi recognized that unity among Indians was essential for resisting these oppressive policies, and he worked tirelessly to bridge divisions of religion, language, and caste within the community. During his early years in South Africa, Gandhi's activism took the form of petitions, letters, and legal advocacy. He sought to challenge discriminatory laws through peaceful negotiation and dialogue with the authorities. However, his appeals often fell on deaf ears, forcing him to reconsider his strategies. It was during this period that he began to develop satyagraha, a method of resistance rooted in truth, nonviolence, and moral persuasion. Unlike traditional forms of protest, satyagraha emphasized self-suffering and steadfast adherence to justice as a means to transform both the oppressor and the oppressed. Gandhi's first major campaign of satyagraha emerged in response to a proposed law in the Transvaal colony requiring all Indians to register and carry identification passes. This legislation, known as the Asiatic Registration Act, was a blatant act of racial discrimination. Gandhi urged the Indian community to resist the law through nonviolent defiance. The campaign saw thousands of Indians refuse to register, endure imprisonment, and even face brutal violence. Despite these hardships, their collective resolve and moral courage eventually forced the government to negotiate. The South African experience also deepened Gandhi's understanding of the interconnectedness of personal ethics and social change. He embraced a life of simplicity and self-discipline, inspired by the teachings of various religious traditions, including Hinduism, Christianity, and Islam. Gandhi believed that leaders must lead by example, and he practiced what he preached by adopting a minimalist lifestyle, wearing simple clothes, and dedicating himself to service. These principles would become hallmarks of his leadership in the years to come. Another transformative aspect of Gandhi's South African years was his growing commitment to inclusivity. Although he initially focused on the rights of Indians, his experiences in South Africa broadened his perspective. He began to recognize the shared struggles of all marginalized groups, including Black South Africans. This realization planted the seeds of Gandhi's later advocacy for universal human rights and his lifelong opposition to oppression in all its forms. Gandhi's wife, Kasturba, and his children joined him in South Africa during this period, and their presence added a personal dimension to his activism. Kasturba became a close ally, participating in protests and enduring imprisonment alongside him. Their partnership demonstrated the importance of family support in Gandhi's journey and highlighted the role of women in movements for justice. The culmination of Gandhi's work in South Africa came with the passage of the Indian Relief Act of 1914, which addressed some of the grievances of the Indian community. While this victory was not comprehensive, it symbolized the power of collective nonviolent resistance and the effectiveness of satyagraha. By the time Gandhi left South Africa in 1914, he had not only achieved tangible improvements for the Indian diaspora, but also honed the strategies and principles that would define his leadership in India's freedom struggle. Gandhi's 21 years in South Africa were transformative. They were marked by his transition from a relatively unknown barrister to a global symbol of resistance against injustice. The lessons he learned, the principles he developed, and the networks he built during this period became the foundation of his later work. South Africa was more than just a chapter in Gandhi's life. It was the crucible in which his ideals were tested and forged, preparing him for the monumental challenges that awaited him in India. In 1915, after spending more than 2 decades in South Africa, Mahatma Gandhi returned to India. He arrived as a man transformed by his experiences, carrying with him a philosophy of nonviolence and civil resistance that would soon galvanize a nation under colonial rule. Gandhi's return marked the beginning of a new era in India's struggle for independence, as he transitioned from being an expatriate activist to the leader of a vast and diverse movement. When Gandhi stepped onto Indian soil, he was greeted with widespread admiration for his work in South Africa. However, he did not immediately immerse himself in the political arena. Instead, Gandhi embarked on a year-long journey across the country to understand the social, economic, and political realities of colonial India. This period of observation and reflection allowed him to connect with the struggles of ordinary Indians, from the impoverished farmers in rural areas to the laborers in urban centers. It was during these travels that Gandhi witnessed the pervasive poverty, exploitation, and injustice under British rule. Gandhi's first major act upon returning to India was to establish the Sabarmati Ashram near Ahmedabad in 1917. The ashram became a microcosm of Gandhi's vision for a just and equitable society. Residents practiced self-sufficiency, simplicity, and communal living, adhering to principles of truth and nonviolence. The ashram was more than a home. It was a laboratory where Gandhi refined the strategies of satyagraha that would later guide India's independence movement. It also became a hub for political and social discussions, attracting individuals who shared Gandhi's vision of a free India. The first significant opportunity for Gandhi to apply his methods in India came with the Champaran Satyagraha in 1917. In the Champaran district of Bihar, farmers were being forced by British planters to grow indigo under exploitative terms. Gandhi, responding to a plea for help, arrived in Champaran to investigate the situation. Despite resistance from local authorities, he organized a non-violent campaign, mobilizing the farmers to assert their rights. His efforts led to a government inquiry and eventual reforms, marking the first successful application of satyagraha in India. Another critical moment followed in 1918 with the Ahmedabad mill strike, where Gandhi mediated between textile mill workers and factory owners. By fasting and urging both sides to act justly, Gandhi demonstrated his ability to bring people together through moral persuasion. These early successes established Gandhi as a champion of the underprivileged and earned him the trust of millions of Indians. The Kheda Satyagraha, also in 1918, further cemented Gandhi's reputation as a leader of the masses. In this campaign, farmers in Gujarat, devastated by crop failures and plague, were unable to pay oppressive land taxes demanded by the British. Gandhi encouraged them to unite and refuse payment. The British government eventually relented, granting relief to the farmers. This victory reinforced Gandhi's belief in the power of collective nonviolent resistance. These initial campaigns were not merely political victories. They were also a testament to Gandhi's ability to connect with the people. Unlike many other leaders of his time, Gandhi immersed himself in the lives of the poor, adopting their simple lifestyle and speaking their language. He wore homespun khadi as a symbol of self-reliance and urged others to boycott British goods, setting the stage for the larger movement against colonial rule. Gandhi's approach to leadership was deeply rooted in moral authority and inclusivity. He sought to bridge divides of caste, religion, and region, advocating for unity among India's diverse population. This was particularly evident in his campaign against untouchability, where he worked to uplift the Dalits, whom he referred to as Harijans or Children of God. Gandhi's efforts challenged the entrenched social hierarchies that often fractured Indian society. By the time Gandhi officially joined the Indian National Congress in 1919, he had become a towering figure in Indian politics. His entry into the Congress transformed the organization, which had previously been dominated by elite, urban leaders. Under Gandhi's influence, the Congress began to embrace mass participation, turning the fight for independence into a truly national movement. Gandhi's leadership also brought a shift in strategy, with an emphasis on nonviolent resistance and civil disobedience as opposed to petitions and negotiations. The defining moment of Gandhi's early years in India came with his opposition to the Rowlatt Act of 1919, which granted the British government sweeping powers to suppress dissent. Gandhi called for a nationwide hartal, or strike, to protest the legislation. Although the hartal saw widespread participation, it also resulted in violent outbreaks, including the infamous Jallianwala Bagh massacre, where British troops killed hundreds of unarmed protesters. The massacre deeply affected Gandhi, strengthening his resolve to fight injustice while reinforcing his commitment to nonviolence. Gandhi's return to India marked the beginning of a transformative phase in the country's history. His ability to mobilize the masses, coupled with his unwavering commitment to truth and nonviolence, gave Indians a new sense of purpose and hope. The campaigns he led during this period demonstrated that ordinary people, united by a common cause, could challenge the might of the British Empire. As Gandhi prepared to scale up his efforts, the seeds of India's independence movement had firmly taken root. As Mahatma Gandhi's leadership in India matured, so did the scale of his efforts to challenge British colonial rule. The non-cooperation movement of 1920 to 1922 marked a turning point in India's struggle for independence. This campaign was Gandhi's first major nationwide movement, bringing millions of Indians together in a unified act of resistance. It was a moment when nonviolent civil disobedience became a powerful tool for challenging colonial authority, and Gandhi emerged as the undisputed leader of India's freedom struggle. The roots of the non-cooperation movement lay in the widespread dissatisfaction with British rule, particularly after the Jallianwala Bagh massacre of 1919 and the imposition of the Rowlatt Act. These events exposed the brutality of British imperialism and galvanized public opinion against the colonial government. Gandhi, recognizing the growing anger and disillusionment, proposed a strategy of non-cooperation that would allow Indians to withdraw their support from the British administration peacefully. Gandhi's vision for the non-cooperation movement was bold and comprehensive. He called on Indians to boycott British goods, institutions, and titles. This included refusing to attend British-run schools and colleges, abstaining from voting in elections, resigning from government positions, and rejecting British textiles in favor of homespun khadi. Gandhi argued that by withdrawing their cooperation, Indians could undermine the foundations of British rule without resorting to violence. The response to Gandhi's call was unprecedented. Millions of Indians from all walks of life joined the movement, making it a truly mass-based campaign. Urban professionals resigned from government jobs, students left British schools, and peasants in rural areas refused to pay taxes. Women also played a significant role, participating in protests, picketing shops that sold foreign goods, and spinning khadi as a symbol of self-reliance. This collective action demonstrated the immense potential of nonviolent resistance in uniting a diverse population against a common oppressor. Despite its peaceful intentions, the non-cooperation movement faced significant challenges. The British government responded with repression, arresting thousands of protesters and using force to suppress demonstrations. Many Indians, frustrated by the lack of immediate results, began to resort to violence, leading to clashes with colonial authorities. Gandhi, however, remained steadfast in his commitment to nonviolence, insisting that the movement's moral strength lay in its adherence to satyagraha. The movement reached a critical juncture in 1922 with the Chauri Chowra incident, where a group of protesters clashed with police, setting a police station on fire and killing 22 officers. This act of violence deeply troubled Gandhi, who believed that any deviation from nonviolence would compromise the moral legitimacy of the struggle. In response, he called off the non-cooperation movement, a decision that shocked many of his followers but underscored his unwavering principles. Although the non-cooperation movement did not achieve its immediate goal of Swaraj, or self-rule, it had a profound impact on India's political landscape. It awakened a sense of agency among ordinary Indians, demonstrating that they could resist colonial oppression collectively. The movement also marked a shift in the Indian National Congress, transforming it from an elite organization into a mass-based political party. Gandhi's emphasis on inclusivity and grassroots participation made the Congress a more effective vehicle for the independence struggle. The movement also reinforced Gandhi's commitment to Swadeshi, or self-reliance. By promoting the use of khadi and the spinning wheel, he sought to create an economic foundation for independence. The boycott of British goods not only hurt colonial trade, but also fostered a sense of pride and unity among Indians. Gandhi's vision of economic self-sufficiency became an integral part of the larger freedom movement, emphasizing that true independence required not only political freedom, but also economic empowerment. Another important outcome of the non-cooperation movement was the emergence of a new generation of leaders inspired by Gandhi's methods. Figures like Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, and Subhash Chandra Bose gained prominence during this period, laying the groundwork for future campaigns. Gandhi's ability to mentor and collaborate with these leaders ensured the continuity of the independence movement, even in the face of setbacks. Despite the movement's premature end, Gandhi viewed it as a success in terms of its moral and psychological impact. It demonstrated the power of collective nonviolence and inspired Indians to believe in their ability to challenge the British Empire. The movement also solidified Gandhi's role as a spiritual and political leader, capable of mobilizing millions through his vision of truth, nonviolence, and self-sacrifice. The non-cooperation movement was a crucial step in India's journey toward independence. It signaled the beginning of a sustained, organized resistance against colonial rule and laid the foundation for future campaigns. Gandhi's leadership during this period demonstrated the transformative potential of nonviolent resistance, both as a means of achieving political goals and as a moral philosophy. Though the road to independence was far from complete, the movement marked a decisive shift in India's fight for freedom, proving that unity and determination could challenge even the most entrenched systems of oppression. The civil disobedience movement, launched in 1930, represented a new phase in Mahatma Gandhi's campaign against British colonial rule. It was a calculated escalation of nonviolent resistance, aimed at directly challenging the legitimacy of British authority in India. Central to this movement was Gandhi's ability to transform an act as simple as making salt into a symbol of defiance, galvanizing millions of Indians to join the struggle for independence. The movement not only tested the resolve of the British Empire, but also demonstrated the power of nonviolent mass resistance. The catalyst for the civil disobedience movement was the salt tax, a repressive policy that prohibited Indians from producing or selling salt, forcing them to buy heavily taxed salt from British authorities. For Gandhi, the salt tax was emblematic of the broader injustice of colonial rule. It affected every Indian, particularly the poor, making it an ideal issue to rally the masses. Gandhi's choice of salt as a focal point was both strategic and symbolic, highlighting the intersection of economic oppression and individual dignity. The movement began with the historic Salt March, a 240-mile journey from Gandhi's Sabarmati ashram to the coastal village of Dandi in Gujarat. On March 12, 1930, Gandhi, accompanied by 78 followers, embarked on this march, capturing the imagination of the nation. Over 24 days, the march grew in numbers as villagers joined Gandhi along the route, transforming the act into a powerful demonstration of unity and resistance. Upon reaching Dandi, Gandhi ceremonially broke the salt law by picking up a handful of natural salt from the beach, an act that reverberated across India. The Salt March was more than a symbolic act. It was the beginning of a widespread campaign of civil disobedience. Across India, people followed Gandhi's example by making their own salt, boycotting British goods, refusing to pay taxes, and resigning from government positions. Women played a prominent role in these activities, organizing protests, picketing liquor shops, and participating in salt making. This mass participation underscored the movement's inclusive nature, bringing together people from all walks of life. The British government responded to the civil disobedience movement with repression. Tens of thousands of protesters, including Gandhi, were arrested. Despite this, the movement continued to gather momentum. The arrests only fueled public anger and strengthened the resolve of the Indian people. The British authorities found themselves increasingly isolated, both domestically and internationally, as the movement exposed the moral bankruptcy of their rule. One of the most notable aspects of the civil disobedience movement was its ability to attract global attention. Journalists and observers from around the world reported on the Salt March and the ensuing protests, bringing international scrutiny to British policies in India. Gandhi's image as a humble yet determined leader of a nonviolent struggle resonated with people far beyond India's borders, turning him into a global symbol of resistance against oppression. The movement also deepened Gandhi's commitment to social reform. While its primary focus was on challenging British rule, Gandhi used the platform to address issues such as untouchability, women's rights, and economic self-sufficiency. He emphasized the importance of self-reliance through the spinning of khadi and the boycott of foreign textiles, urging Indians to reclaim their dignity and independence in every aspect of life. Although the movement did not immediately achieve its goal of Swaraj, self-rule, it dealt a significant blow to British authority. The inability of the colonial government to suppress the protests entirely revealed the growing weakness of British control over India. The civil disobedience movement also laid the groundwork for future campaigns, fostering a sense of solidarity and empowerment among Indians that would prove crucial in the final push for independence. The movement officially came to a temporary halt in 1931 with the signing of the Gandhi-Irwin Pact. The agreement resulted in the release of political prisoners and allowed Indians to make salt for personal use. In exchange, Gandhi agreed to suspend the movement and attend the Second Round Table Conference in London to negotiate India's future. While the pact was criticized by some as a compromise, it underscored Gandhi's pragmatic approach to achieving incremental progress. In hindsight, the civil disobedience movement was a defining moment in India's struggle for independence. It demonstrated the power of collective action and the effectiveness of nonviolence as a political strategy. Gandhi's leadership, characterized by moral clarity and an unwavering commitment to truth, inspired millions to believe in the possibility of freedom. The movement reaffirmed the principle that even the smallest acts of defiance, when rooted in justice, could challenge the mightiest of empires. The civil disobedience movement and the Salt March were not merely events in India's history. They were a testament to the enduring strength of nonviolent resistance. Gandhi's ability to transform a simple substance like salt into a symbol of resistance exemplified his genius as a leader and his deep understanding of the human spirit. The movement left an indelible mark on India's independence struggle, paving the way for the eventual dismantling of colonial rule. By the early 1940s, the Indian independence movement was at a critical juncture. Mahatma Gandhi's leadership, characterized by his unwavering commitment to nonviolence, had already mobilized millions in the fight against British rule. However, the outbreak of World War II and the British government's failure to include India in war-related decision-making intensified calls for complete independence. The Quit India movement, launched in 1942, became the most decisive and radical phase of the freedom struggle. It was a culmination of decades of resistance and a testament to Gandhi's ability to unify the nation under the banner of nonviolent resistance. The immediate context for the Quit India movement was the British government's announcement of India's involvement in World War II without consulting Indian leaders. The Cripps mission of 1942, sent by the British to negotiate India's political future, proposed limited self-government, but fell far short of offering full independence. Gandhi and the Indian National Congress rejected the proposal, viewing it as an insincere attempt to placate Indian demands while maintaining British control. Frustrated by British intransigence, Gandhi called for a nationwide campaign to force the colonial rulers to leave India. The Quit India movement was officially launched on August 8, 1942, following the historic resolution passed by the Indian National Congress at the Bombay session. In his speech, Gandhi gave the clarion call, "Do or die," urging Indians to act decisively but non-violently to achieve freedom. This marked a departure from earlier campaigns, as Gandhi now sought complete independence rather than incremental reforms. The urgency of the demand reflected the growing impatience of the Indian people with British rule. The movement rapidly gained momentum, with protests erupting across the country. Students, workers, farmers, and women joined the struggle in unprecedented numbers. Strikes, boycotts, and acts of civil disobedience disrupted the colonial administration, paralyzing transportation, communication, and industrial production. Unlike previous movements, the Quit India movement was decentralized, with local leaders and grassroots activists playing a pivotal role. This grassroots participation underscored the depth of India's discontent and the widespread desire for independence. The British government's response to the movement was swift and brutal. Within hours of the resolution's passage, Gandhi and the top Congress leadership, including Jawaharlal Nehru and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, were arrested and detained. The arrests aimed to decapitate the movement, but instead, they fueled public outrage. Without centralized leadership, the movement became more spontaneous and, at times, uncontrollable. In several regions, protesters resorted to sabotage and violence, targeting government buildings, railways, and police stations. While Gandhi remained steadfast in his call for nonviolence, the chaos reflected the intensity of India's frustration under colonial rule. The Quit India movement faced harsh repression. The British imposed martial law in several areas, using mass arrests, censorship, and brutal crackdowns to suppress dissent. Over 100,000 people were arrested, and countless others were killed or injured in police firings. Despite this, the movement persisted, with underground networks of activists continuing to coordinate resistance. Leaders like Jayaprakash Narayan and Aruna Asaf Ali emerged as key figures, keeping the spirit of the struggle alive. One of the most significant aspects of the Quit India movement was its impact on Indian society. It brought together people from diverse backgrounds, transcending barriers of caste, religion, and region. Women, in particular, played a prominent role, leading protests, organizing underground activities, and enduring imprisonment. This inclusivity not only strengthened the movement, but also reflected the transformative potential of the independence struggle in reshaping India's social fabric. The movement also had international repercussions. The sheer scale of resistance and the British government's repressive response drew global attention to India's plight. Leaders from across the world, including those in allied nations, began to question the legitimacy of British rule in India. This growing international awareness, combined with the financial and military strains of World War II, weakened Britain's ability to maintain its colonial empire. Despite its inability to achieve immediate independence, the Quit India movement marked a turning point in India's freedom struggle. It demonstrated the determination of the Indian people to achieve self-rule at any cost, leaving the British government with no doubt about the inevitability of independence. The movement also solidified Gandhi's status as the moral and political leader of India, despite his incarceration during much of the campaign. The Quit India movement's significance lies not only in its direct impact, but also in its symbolic value. It was a final, unequivocal rejection of colonial rule and a reaffirmation of India's demand for sovereignty. The sacrifices made during this period, from ordinary villagers to prominent leaders, underscored the collective resolve of the Indian people to chart their own destiny. By the time World War II ended in 1945, Britain's economic and political capacity to govern India had eroded significantly. The Quit India movement had set the stage for the final negotiations that would lead to India's independence in 1947. While the road to freedom was fraught with challenges, the movement had proven that the spirit of nonviolent resistance, combined with the unity of the Indian people, could overcome even the most entrenched systems of oppression. The conclusion of World War II in 1945 set in motion a series of events that culminated in India's long-awaited independence. The Quit India movement, despite its violent outbursts and the British repression, had exhausted Britain's resources and political will to maintain control over India. In the aftermath of the war, Britain, grappling with economic ruin and facing rising nationalist pressure, was forced to reconsider its colonial ambitions. The road to India's independence, however, was fraught with challenges, marked by political negotiations, communal tensions, and the looming specter of partition. By the time the war ended, the demand for Indian independence had gained overwhelming momentum. The Indian National Congress, led by Jawaharlal Nehru and supported by Gandhi, had become the undisputed political force, advocating for full self-rule. However, the British faced growing difficulties in negotiating with the Congress and other Indian political entities. The Muslim League, under the leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, had made significant strides in asserting its own political agenda, demanding separate statehood for Muslims in the form of Pakistan. The tension between the Congress and the Muslim League was one of the defining features of the post-war period, and it posed a significant obstacle to India's unity. In 1946, the British government, aware of the escalating unrest in India, established the Cabinet Mission to resolve the political crisis. The mission, which aimed to propose a constitutional framework for post-independence India, initially sought to retain India as a united entity. However, it quickly became clear that the differences between the Congress and the Muslim League were irreconcilable. The Muslim League's insistence on a separate Muslim state, Pakistan, led to a deepening divide, and the prospect of partition began to emerge as a likely outcome. Gandhi, who had consistently advocated for unity between Hindus and Muslims, was devastated by the prospect of partition. For him, India's strength lay in its pluralism, where different communities could live together peacefully under a shared identity. He had long warned against the dangers of religious division, but his vision seemed increasingly out of reach as the political situation deteriorated. The Congress, despite Gandhi's influence, was unable to bridge the gap between the two communities, and Jinnah's demand for Pakistan gained increasing traction. The year 1947 witnessed a series of developments that brought partition closer to reality. The Mountbatten Plan, named after Lord Louis Mountbatten, the last British Viceroy of India, laid the groundwork for the partition of India into two separate dominions, India and Pakistan. Mountbatten, who had been appointed as Viceroy in 1947, was tasked with overseeing the transfer of power. Faced with the threat of civil war between Hindus and Muslims, Mountbatten and the British government expedited the process, setting an ambitious deadline for the partition and independence of India, August 15, 1947. The partition was officially announced, and the boundaries between the two new nations were drawn by the Radcliffe Commission, led by the British lawyer Cyril Radcliffe. The partition divided Punjab and Bengal, two regions with significant Muslim and Hindu populations, leading to mass migrations, religious violence, and widespread bloodshed. The abruptness of the partition left millions of people displaced, as Hindus and Sikhs fled to India, while Muslims moved to Pakistan. The violence that accompanied the partition was some of the most horrific in the history of India, resulting in an estimated 1 to 2 million deaths and millions more injured or displaced. Gandhi, who had always maintained his commitment to nonviolence, found himself powerless to stop the violence that followed partition. He embarked on a mission to promote peace and reconciliation, traveling to riot-torn areas and fasting to protest the bloodshed. Despite his efforts, Gandhi was unable to prevent the chaos that engulfed the newly formed nations. The communal violence during partition became a painful chapter in India's history, with scars that would persist long after independence. On August 15, 1947, India was officially granted independence. The Union Jack was lowered, and the Indian tricolor was raised in its place. Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first prime minister, delivered his iconic speech, Tryst with Destiny, declaring that India was now a free nation. While the moment was celebrated by millions who had fought for freedom, it was also marked by a sense of tragedy. The country's independence came at a steep price. Millions had been displaced, and the promise of unity had been shattered by the violence of partition. For Gandhi, the celebration of independence was bittersweet. He had spent his life fighting for a united, nonviolent India, but the partition had torn the nation apart along religious lines. Gandhi's last days were consumed with attempts to heal the wounds of partition. He continued to advocate for peace between Hindus and Muslims, urging both communities to live together harmoniously. Unfortunately, his efforts were met with resistance from both sides, and his work remained incomplete. In January 1948, just months after India's independence, Gandhi was assassinated by Nathuram Godse, a Hindu nationalist who opposed Gandhi's efforts to reconcile with Muslims. The assassination shocked the nation and the world, marking the tragic end of a life dedicated to nonviolence and peace. Gandhi's death underscored the deep divisions that remained in post-independence India, as the violence of partition continued to haunt the newly formed nations. The independence of India and the partition that accompanied it were transformative events in world history. While India achieved political sovereignty, the social and religious rifts exposed by partition left a legacy of division and conflict. Gandhi's vision of a united, peaceful India was left unfulfilled, but his philosophy of nonviolence continued to inspire movements for justice and peace around the world. The road to independence, while fraught with struggles and setbacks, ultimately led to the birth of two nations, India and Pakistan, each with its own complex history, shaped by the forces of colonialism, nationalism, and religious identity. The story of Mahatma Gandhi is not merely the narrative of an individual leader or the struggle of a nation for freedom. It is a universal tale of resilience, moral clarity, and the transformative power of nonviolent resistance. Gandhi's life and work left an indelible mark on the world, extending far beyond the borders of India. His philosophy of satyagraha, or truth force, has influenced global movements for civil rights, social justice, and peace, making him an enduring symbol of nonviolent resistance. As India's fight for independence culminated in 1947, Gandhi's broader impact on the world continued to grow, shaping the trajectory of international movements for equality and human rights. Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolence, or ahimsa, was at the heart of his activism. This principle dictated that true strength lies in the capacity to resist oppression without resorting to violence. His belief in nonviolence was grounded in deep spiritual convictions, shaped by his studies of Hinduism, Jainism, and other religious philosophies. For Gandhi, nonviolence was not simply a tactic, but a way of life. It was a means of achieving not only political and social change, but also personal and collective moral elevation. Gandhi's message of nonviolence resonated not only with the Indian masses, but also with leaders and activists across the world, who adopted his approach to challenge entrenched systems of oppression. One of the most profound impacts of Gandhi's philosophy was its influence on other leaders of social and political change, particularly Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States and Nelson Mandela in South Africa. King, inspired by Gandhi's nonviolent resistance, adapted his principles in the American civil rights movement. King's famous Montgomery bus boycott and his leadership during the March on Washington were directly influenced by Gandhi's teachings. King often referred to Gandhi as a great soul and recognized the power of nonviolence in dismantling racial segregation and inequality in the United States. Similarly, in South Africa, Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress, ANC, were influenced by Gandhi's struggle for justice. Gandhi's time in South Africa, where he fought against discriminatory laws through nonviolent protests, was formative in shaping Mandela's approach to the apartheid regime. Although Mandela later employed armed resistance during the ANC's fight for liberation, the principles of nonviolence and reconciliation remained central to his vision, as seen in his post-apartheid leadership. Mandela's emphasis on forgiveness and national unity echoes Gandhi's ideal of a peaceful, nonviolent society. Gandhi's influence also extended to movements in other parts of the world. His philosophy inspired Cesar Chavez in the United States, who led the farm workers movement in California and employed nonviolent tactics to advocate for workers' rights. Similarly, Aung San Suu Kyi in Myanmar, who led the pro-democracy movement against military dictatorship, was deeply inspired by Gandhi's example, emphasizing peaceful civil disobedience as a method for resisting tyranny. Beyond political and social movements, Gandhi's ideas also left a lasting mark on global discussions around human rights and international peace. The United Nations and various international organizations have often drawn upon Gandhi's principles in their efforts to promote conflict resolution and diplomacy. His philosophy contributed to the development of nonviolent communication, restorative justice, and peace-building initiatives around the world. Gandhi's insistence on peace, tolerance, and dialogue in the face of conflict remains a touchstone for international efforts to address issues of war, terrorism, and injustice. In India, Gandhi's legacy is ever-present, deeply woven into the fabric of the nation's identity. Though the challenges of post-independence India were immense, his principles continued to guide the country in its democratic journey. His emphasis on self-reliance, particularly through the Khadi movement, has been a source of inspiration for India's ongoing efforts toward economic independence and sustainability. While modern India has evolved in many ways, Gandhi's ideals continue to be invoked in political and social discourse, reminding the nation of its ethical foundations. However, Gandhi's legacy in India is not without complexity. His vision of Hindu-Muslim unity, his pacifism, and his commitment to social equality often put him at odds with certain political currents, especially in the years following partition. Some critics argue that Gandhi's inability to prevent the violence of partition and his insistence on appeasing Muslims undermined his vision of a unified India. Additionally, his advocacy for the removal of untouchability and his attempts to reform Hindu society were met with resistance from conservative elements within the country. Despite these challenges, Gandhi's legacy remains a cornerstone of India's moral and spiritual identity. Globally, however, Gandhi's status as a moral leader has only grown with time. His message of peace, tolerance, and social justice resonates in a world that continues to grapple with war, inequality, and violence. His unwavering belief in the power of the individual to bring about change has inspired countless people to take action, no matter how daunting the task may seem. His life serves as a reminder that nonviolent resistance is not a passive form of protest, but a dynamic and powerful tool for achieving justice and creating lasting societal transformation. Gandhi's own life was one of constant learning, evolving, and refining his understanding of truth and nonviolence. He faced immense personal challenges, from his early experiences of racial discrimination in South Africa to the internal struggles he confronted in trying to reconcile his ideals with the realities of a deeply divided world. Yet, through it all, Gandhi remained committed to his principles, exemplifying the idea that true leadership comes not from the power to control others, but from the ability to inspire and uplift them. In conclusion, Mahatma Gandhi's legacy is a universal call to action, to resist injustice, to seek truth, and to pursue peace, even when the odds are against us. His life and work transcend national boundaries, offering a powerful framework for global movements striving for freedom, justice, and equality. As the world continues to face pressing challenges, Gandhi's vision of a peaceful and just society remains as relevant today as it was during his lifetime, reminding us that through love, nonviolence, and collective effort, lasting change is possible.